Hello, listeners. Welcome to Marie Lives the Horror. This is the first episode of the series True Paranormal Ghost Stories. For this first episode, I will be sharing some of my own paranormal experiences. So without further ado, join me in my horror chamber as we live the horror together. I have never publicly shared any of my personal paranormal experiences before. The most I've ever done is share a few experiences with some of my family. I have been told from my family that a few of us are sensitive and intuitive. Whether it is paranormal or otherwise, I have never really truly opened myself to that intuition. But apparently, most of my experiences have been because of this connection. My first experience that I remember vividly was when my family moved away from my first childhood home when I was about 13 or 14 years old. We had been living in this new house for about a month or so, and I started to have some strange experiences, or that I was the only one who noticed it. During this time, my parents were fighting quite often, and I grew accustomed to hearing them arguing in their room. But then one night, I was hearing them argue, or I thought that's what was going on, and I stepped into the hallway to use the restroom. As soon as I stepped outside of my room, the arguing stopped completely. I walked over to my parents' door and I put my ear to it. I could not hear anything at all. Both of my parents were asleep. Everyone was asleep, and I wasn't sure what I heard. I was very young and so very confused, as I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. The next night, it was the exact same thing. I would hear mumbled, faraway voices arguing, just to step into the hallway and hear nothing but silence. Then one night, it got even stranger. It was in the summertime, and as a young teenage girl, of course, I stayed up very late, to almost maybe the morning, and for some reason, I just could not get to sleep. I forced myself to turn off the TV and try to shut my eyes. Everything was very quiet, but then suddenly, I started to hear the voices again. Far away, mumbled arguing. But it was different this time. The voices somehow started becoming louder, and they started to move. I first heard them by my front door. Then somehow I heard them again in front of my closet, and then at the foot of my bed. I was so scared I jumped out of my bed and turned on all my lights. I stood there frozen, waiting to see what would happen or what I could hear, but nothing ever did. After that night, I slept with my TV or my radio on, or I would sleep with headphones in my ears so I wouldn't hear the voices. A few months later, we moved out of that house, and I never heard the voices again. After I turned 20, I moved back in with my parents. Me and my family went through many dysfunctional moments in this home, and I still can't help and wonder if there wasn't something paranormal that was affecting us. I still believe it had something to do with it. My parents' home was bought after the original owner had recently passed away inside the house. After about a year, I specifically started to notice a lot of negative activity inside the house. My mother was always sick throughout her life, but inside this home, she suffered her worst sickness thus far. The living room was probably the worst. Whoever sat on our couch, for some reason, always felt their energy being drained. People would literally fall asleep if they sat there for too long. It happened to anyone who came into our house. I often found my mother passed out on the couch a few different times, in which I had to call her an ambulance. Things then started becoming even more negative after my brother and his family moved in with us. They were staying in a room that was connected next to mine. Apparently, we were all experiencing the same thing. Almost every night, they would hear a knock on my bathroom window. I would get up and see if it was them, but they would be asleep. They also started hearing people apparently having a conversation inside my bathroom. It wasn't just me hearing this or experiencing these things. My brother also told me of a time when he woke up and saw someone opening the curtains of the window inside of his room. He got up to see who it was, and he couldn't find anyone there. I also had a friend who claimed to be sensitive to come visit me at my house, and he explained to me that the person who had passed away inside the home was the one that was draining people's energy in our living room. He also told me to be careful because something dark lived in my bathroom. I really didn't believe him at the time. The last worst paranormal event I had in this home made me believe that what he said was true. I once again had stayed up very late, and I felt my room get very cold. I knew there was something in there with me, but I couldn't see anything. I turned on my lights, and something pushed me back down onto my bed. I could feel a presence right in front of me, and goosebumps all over my body. At that very second, my father came into my room. He was obviously drunk and started yelling at me and insulting me for no reason. We had a very ugly argument, and I still believe that whatever was in my room with me that night somehow affected him as well. Very soon after this experience, my family moved away from that house, and all of us parted ways. Nothing was the same with any of us after this. These next paranormal experiences that I'm going to share all happened to me while I was living with my aunt in her home. I discovered a lot of supernatural things about myself, and I would have never found any of this out if I hadn't lived there. I want to say it was around maybe the second month of me living there that strange things started to happen to me. I had a little more experience then with these situations, and I noticed if I paid attention to it, it would only become even more noticeable. So the little things that would happen, I would ignore and pretend they were not there. Now, my aunt had 4 children, 3 smaller children, and 1 child who was in high school. There was one night I was about to finally fall asleep after coming home from work, and I heard little footsteps in the kitchen. My first thought was that 2 of the smaller children were up and sneaking a snack. I stayed quiet and listened, and I heard the little footsteps now running back and forth from the main hallway to the kitchen. It continued on for maybe about 2 minutes, and at this point, I got up to confront them about being up so late. I walked into the kitchen area, but there was no one in there. I walked further into the kitchen, and I could literally feel on the ground the footsteps walking away from me and back towards the hallway. Suddenly, everything went quiet. I mustered up some courage, and I went in to check in on all the kids. I walked into each of their rooms, and they were all in deep sleep. I did not understand what was going on. I did not want to overthink the situation and freak myself out. I went back into my room, and due to everything I've experienced thus far, I fell asleep with headphones in my ears that night. The sounds of the little footsteps continued for the next few weeks after this, in which then I knew there was something inside of my aunt's home. So far, it had not been too serious, and I had never personally bothered me or the kids, so I didn't say anything to anyone about it. But then one night, I stayed up late, and again, I heard the little footsteps. I ignored it and continued to watch TV. But then I heard the little footsteps run up to my entryway and then stop. I froze and muted my TV and waited to see if I heard anything else. I was lying flat on my stomach, and I had my feet and hands hanging out from the sides of my bed. The next thing I knew, the bracelet on my arm started to move very slightly up and down my forearm. I freaked out, took it off, and threw it across my bed. After that, my ankle bracelet on my leg did the same thing. I freaked out and jumped out of my bed and told it to stop. Up until then, nothing inside that home had ever personally touched me. I heard the little footsteps run back through the kitchen, and this time, I heard giggling. I definitely feel whatever this was playing with me, much like my little cousins would. It really unnerved me, but I just still decided not to say anything. After the experience I had with feeling and hearing some sort of ghost children, I decided that I was going to install a door to my room. Every night, I started sleeping with the door to my room closed, and I did not have another encounter with what I thought was ghost children. My aunt's home was always very lively and very busy. With 4 kids and 3 dogs, it was never quiet inside that house. But there was one day that I was actually left home alone for a change. I came home from work, and I decided I was going to take a shower and relax. I don't really remember why, but I needed to go into one of the kids' rooms to get something. I left the lights turned off and I walked in. As I looked to my left towards one of the boys' beds, I saw a transparent figure of a man sitting on his bed. I could not see his entire body, just the upper torso, and I could vividly see all of the features of his face. He had sunken dark eyes and long black straight hair. He had no expression, but his eyes were full of sadness. As soon as I saw him, I did a double take and turned on the lights, and the figure was gone. For some reason, I wasn't really scared of this apparition, and I honestly doubted myself about what I saw. The room was dark, and I only saw him for a few seconds, but all of the vividness of his features made me wonder if I really did see something. A few days after seeing the ghost of the man, the house was again filled with people. It was the middle of the day, and everyone was off in different parts of the house. I had volunteered to take the dogs out to the backyard to play. I walked into the kitchen, and I automatically felt like something was off. The dogs didn't react to how I was feeling, so I tried to ignore it. I thought to myself I was being silly. It was the middle of the day after all. I walked over to the door that leads into the backyard porch, and as I reached for the handle, the doorknob turned by itself and the door opened. I backed up and I watched the door fully open and then out of nowhere completely close again by itself. My aunt's boxer was standing in front of me with his attention on the door. He was tensed up and ready to pounce at whatever was in front of me. I waited to see what would happen. And then all of a sudden, I heard a loud boom on the other side of the porch door. It was so loud that everyone ran over to see what happened. I couldn't explain any of it. The last thing that happened to me at this house was once again when I was up very late. I was by myself. I was laying down on my bed, and I heard a tapping at a window. I didn't really know what it was, if it was anything at all. I stayed silent. I didn't move, and again I heard tapping. The tapping was at the window, then on the wall, then some reason I heard it on the roof. And then I thought I heard something like growling. I was freaked out. I turned on all my lights. I slept with my headphones in my ears, and I ignored everything that was going on that night. About a week later, I got the opportunity to leave that house, and I took it. All of these events happened about 5 years or more ago, and now I have accepted that I am sensitive to these things. But I do not allow for these beings or entities or spirits to infest my life or my loved ones. I keep myself always surrounded by positive energy, and thankfully, I am living a very peaceful life. Hello, listeners. Thanks for listening to this episode of True Paranormal Ghost Stories as you live the horror with me. If you would like to submit some of your own true paranormal experiences for me to narrate on this channel, check the description down below and send them over to my email. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell to keep up with future episodes. Thank you for listening. I am your host, Marie Lives the Horror.